Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Brendan Hansen.
I'm Jake Friedman.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And today, Brendan and I are going through our top 10 games of all time. Doing this once again this year, updating our list, and it should be a ton of fun. So get excited because you'll be hearing the best 10 games of all time and whatever Brendan put on his list as well.
Oh my gosh. A huge part of why we're doing this right now is that we can set Jake's opinion straight. And also, we know that we have an influx of new listeners right now. We're amidst Golden Geek Award nominations, and Decision Space was nominated as Best Podcast of 2023. So up until May 12th of 2024, you can go on and vote for us as Board Game Geek's Best Podcast officially of the year, not just to be one of the nominees, but to be a winner. And we would be so grateful if you would. There's more info on how to do that in the show notes, but also we want to make sure you understand our tastes and our biases so you can understand where we're coming from when we talk about games, or we settle into one of our What We Talk About episodes, and you can better understand our perspectives. And what better way to sort of get at that idea than just going through our top 10 games of all time right now.
So the format we're going to go with is we'll start by sharing our honorable mentions, the games that just missed the cut, and then we'll go bottom to top, 10 to 1. We'll take turns and we'll talk through our games. So hopefully you will first pause the episode, go to boardgamegeek.com to vote for Decision Space for Best Podcast, then resume and enjoy the conversation.
And then while we're doing that, we can talk about how Jake does not like Reiner Knizia anymore. It's official this year, this episode. He's just tarnishing the great doctor. It's going to be such a shame, but don't worry. I've got him covered. Jake, why don't you do your honorable mentions this year? Pursuant with that idea.
Yeah, so this is my number 15 best game of all time. So pretty highly regarded, if you ask me.
You did a top 50, and then your honorable mentions are 15 through 10.
That's
11.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess very quickly, my process was I came up with the 50 games that I thought were the best games in the world of all time.
Nice.
I looked at my own collection. I looked at my most played games on Board Game Arena and Yucata. I looked through the list of games I played with my Monday night board game group and came up with a list of 50 that I felt were deserving. Then I ran it through the Pub Meeple ranking, and that's what generated my list. So if you're curious to see that whole list, you can join our Discord and kind of tear it apart there. So these honorable mentions, I'm just going to read through really quickly, are my number 15 through number 11. So all games I really, really love. And so I think, all slander aside, number 15, Raw by Reiner Knizia. Number 14, My City by Reiner Knizia. And these were previously number 3 and number 6 on my list. Number, where am I? 13?
13.
High Society by Reiner Knizia. Number 12, Bruges. Previously number 4 on my list, and also previously number 1 when I first did this. And then number 11, just missing the cut, The Resistance, my favorite social deduction game of all time.
Awesome. What happened to Raw?
Last year we did it. I just received my pledge for the, super fancy 25th century game version of Raw. So I've just been playing it a ton, having a ton of fun with it. I've also had some plays that either just felt like maybe they dragged a tiny bit at a 5-player playing count, or just playing with some more casual friends and having people have trouble grok it just a little bit more than I would like. So I think the game is incredible. Truly one of the best games of all time, one of my absolute favorite designs, but just not as flexible as maybe I had thought and hoped this time last year.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I love Raw too, and I would love to play it with you, but it is not on my top 10. And it's not in my honorable mentions. My honorable mentions this year include...
that says a lot. That speaks volumes.
It does. Just wait. Just you wait. Include BattleCon, which was previously my number 5 game. Monolith Arena, a really cool sort of hex-based tactics combat game that's really set up as a dueling game for 2 players to play head-to-head. Tigris and Euphrates. There's a lot of competition for Knizia on my list, so it didn't make my top 10 this year. Though I am playing a lot of Tigris and Euphrates right now and loving it. And I finally tried the backside of the board, Jake. I don't love it. Original Tigris and Euphrates board. Way to go. And then other honorable mentions. I've been playing a ton of Magic the Gathering, and I'm loving it. Outlaws of Thunder Junction is the newest set, and I think it's an amazing draft experience, and I'm sad to say how much I love it. So that is an honorable mention this year. For me, it's close to my top 10. I really thought of this as my top 10 board game and sort of tabletop hobby card games of all time. And I think Magic, for me, is sort of adjacent to that space in a lot of ways. I don't play Commander, which I know a lot of people kind of slotted into that space in their head. So for me, Magic's an honorable mention. The Fox in the Forest is a trick-taking game that I love for 2 players. And then Just One is another honorable mention. I had a lot of amazing games of Just One this year. It works for so many different groups. And I feel like we've sung the praise of Just One on the podcast at a ton. And I know that's just a celebrated game overall. But I think right now that's my favorite party game. And just too much competition to make it into my top 10.
Awesome. Some great honorable mentions, some of which are definitely on my top 50, but I don't think any of them made my top 10 either. So, with the honorable mentions out of the way, it's time officially to bring you our personal top 10 games. Brendan, are you ready?
I'm ready. And I think you get to go first. You're number 10.
Awesome. My number 10 this year is a game that was new to me last year. I played it for the first time with a podcast listener at Geekway to the West. Or maybe it might have actually been Geekway Mini. Either way, that game is Trajan, a classic, bigger game by one of my favorite designers of all time, Stefan Feld. And I think Trajan is a game that is perhaps falling out of favor. I don't, when I first joined the hobby in 2015, this was like a big game, really popular, getting a lot of play. And I don't think it's a game that I hear about as much these days, but I'm here to talk about it once more and let you know that really, if you haven't tried this game for whatever reason, maybe you feel like it's 2-point salady for you, or you feel like it's too heavy or too big, you're wrong. You have to try this game. Basically, what happens in Trajan is it is a classic point salad Feld game, but maybe the best version of it, where you have all kinds of different little mini games on the board where you'll be sending out your workers to collect various resources, to sell goods, to carry out kind of like a military campaign, to claim windows, just all the classic Roman things that one might do. And it's all tied together by a central hero mechanism, which is a non-callable action selection mechanism that is just endlessly fascinating. And it makes a game that maybe would feel like there's some downtime fly by as you kind of are head down trying to min-max your way to like being the best non-callable player in the game. Absolutely a blast. A game that just whips around the table. That's kind of the feeling. And I've now played it, I think, 4 times all at the table. And it's one that I would just love to play more if I could find both copies of this game and people eager to play with me. It's definitely up there with the best Stefan Feld games of all time. In my number 10 game, Trajan.
Nice. Awesome. One I really want to play with you, Jake. It looks so cool. Okay, so my number 10 game of all time is a game that I've played well over 100 times. One of the only games in recent memories I've completely played out the score pad on, and that is Cascadia. Cascadia is a puzzly little game for 2 to 4 players, but I think it's best at 2. It's a game where the cumulative effects of your good decisions win you the game, and there's rarely big splashy turns that really pull your head down, but I find it's my favorite comfort game, a game that I can just sit down and kind of get in a zen headspace as you sort of ride the waves of fun, crunchy decisions that are comfortable. There's nothing here that's really pushing you or prodding you. And it's a game that I like to play with a cup of coffee with my wife, Maya. Cascadia is just great. I think it rides the line of puzzle and game almost perfectly for me. Everyone's taste, I think, is somewhere on that spectrum. Even for more puzzly games, how puzzly do you want your puzzly game to be? Cascadia has just enough elements of risk-taking at times and interesting decisions with these pinecone tokens that allow you to recycle some of the entwined drafted tokens that are there, because every turn you draft a terrain tile and an animal tile. You're kind of managing these two puzzles simultaneously. So I think it's a perfect blend of game and puzzle, and Cascadia is my 10th favorite game of all time. And no, I have not played the expansions. I don't know if, I don't think Cascadia needs them.
Yeah, I think Cascade is a great pick, and the thing that saves it from just feeling overwhelmingly puzzly. We've been playing a lot of a puzzly game on Board Game Arena together, and I think the issue with that game is it's just kind of the same puzzle every
Yeah.
time, so it starts to feel like played out after only a few plays. And Cascadia feels similarly puzzly, but because it has the variable game setup, right? That puzzle's slightly different every time you play, and that makes it, I think, much more enjoyable to, go for those 100 repeated plays.
100%. I love, so Jake's talking about there's these, you're always collecting, sort of building these same 5 animals, but they have these different variants that you can play with. So bears come in 4 or 5 different versions that you can put in your game. And I think that that's a really cool way to do variability, where you have a mechanism where this element of the game is always trying to accomplish the same thing in this play space, but it's slightly modified, it's a slight variant that just gives you a different flavor. And then the combination of those things really makes the game spark.
Awesome. So I guess it's time for me to bring you the number 9 best game of all time. And I'm at 2 games so far, Brendan, and it's going to be 2 games that are new to my list. And
Okay.
I'm going to be talking about number 9, Scout, by Oink
Oh,
Games and
wow.
designer Kei Kajino. So I have absolutely fallen head over heels for Scout this year, and that has largely been due to its flexibility to play both with gamers for like a really fun strategic cutthroat experience, but also a game that I've enjoyed playing at work with my non-gamer colleagues because it's just such an easy and familiar type of game to get into. So, what is Scout? It is a shedding card game with numbers on cards where you are trying to create pairs, triples, quads, and then also runs of cards in your hand, all without ever reordering the cards in your hand. So that kind of escalating poker hand style concept is really familiar to people. And then I find the decisions for how you choose to play cards out of your hand so that you're, able to build up better and better hands. And then when you choose to take an off turn by, instead of playing cards, scouting, taking something from the middle to, help bridge 2 different things you want to do in your hand, because that allows you to place it in your hand anywhere. Really tactically rewarding for my gamer brain. And with Scout, you get all of that in 15 or 20 minutes of play, and it's not so overwhelmingly bandwidth testing that you can have really fun conversation and table talk while you play. So Scout is perhaps my very favorite small box card game on the market right now. I think it might be the best iteration of that of all time based on its placement in this list. And yeah, it's one the more I play it, the more I enjoy it. I will say it's probably best at 4 players. I think that's kind of
Yeah.
the sweet spot for Scout. But it's also not the kind of game where you have to play by the book, right? Play like a full 4-hand game. You could play 2, you could play 3, you could play 8. And it's going to be a fun and rewarding, quick experience every time. Just a brilliant little game. And that is Scout.
Jake, should we do an episode on Scout?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm
I
down.
mean, we've talked about it on and off for a while. And I think knowing now that it's your 9th favorite game of all time as of right now, and we both enjoy it, I think we got to cover it this year. Let's do it.
All right, put it on the back burner.
Okay, awesome. My 9th favorite game of all time is Azul. Azul is a relatively straightforward tile collection puzzle with just enough of a scoring twist to make the mental puzzle of pulling together an optimal scoring on your board live just past that sort of cognitive horizon. And I think those are the games that I love, where it feels like you can almost pick the knot of playing that game every single time you play it. We sort of feel like, oh, if I play it once more, I know I'll have this game completely figured out. Azul is also a game that I feel like I can play with anyone. And I think that's one of Azul's greatest strengths. I can sit down and I can play a game of Azul with Jake, and it's really cutthroat, really thinky, and an interesting, tense decision space where we can really be at each other's teeth. And I can also pull it out when my family's around and have a little bit more relaxed 4-player game. Yes, and it builds these nice tense moments with the dynamic tile drafting system that it has. There's all these variable groupings of tiles created. Whenever you take a single color, there's 5 colors in the game of tiles from one of those locations. They get pushed into the middle, all the remaining tiles, and it creates this really interesting ebb and flow to the game, both in the pace and flow of the game itself, and also in the shape of the decision space created from game to game and round to round. Azul never outstays its welcome. It, I think, is a complete and total classic, and it's a game I've really enjoyed returning to over and over again. So that's why Michael Kiesling's Azul is my number 9 game of all time.
It's an amazing game. It's definitively, in my opinion, the best Azul game.
Azul is the best Azul game for sure.
The only one that made my top 50 list. I don't think it made my top 10, but it's a 10 out of 10 design. That's what I reviewed it on this podcast. And while it might not like inspire the same passion for me that it does for you, or at least to make the top 10 list, the design is perfect. There's nothing you would change about the design of Azul. It's just distilled down to a perfect little game, and I love it. So great pick.
Azul and Cascadia both get a big bump for me, Jake, I'll say, because even though both of them as designs maybe just seem relatively straightforward, they're 2 games that Maya and I and my wife just go back to time and time again. And I think if I find myself playing games for years at a time, there must be something special there, right? Even if it doesn't seem as flashy as maybe some of the other games that I have rated higher.
Yeah, it's an eminently revisitable game.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
That's right. We're not giving up.
We're giggling, and new listeners are like, "Why are they giggling? What's the point of the giggling?"
People are like, "You'll never make revisitable a thing." Watch us.
It's different than replayable.
It is. It absolutely is. Yeah, we think so. There's at least 2 of us who think that.
That's
Brendan,
right. Yes. Your number 8 game?
My number 8 game of all time. Do you think that this would be also a new game to the list, or do you think now is time that I'll go back to one of my previous top 10 games I love so much?
I feel like you tend to really enjoy the games that you play, and you tend to revisit the same games that you love. So for this reason, I think you're trying to bait me, and this is a new game on the list.
That's right, Brendan. 3 for 3. 3 new games on my top 10 list.
Wow.
And this one is a game that has changed the way I feel about an entire classic board game mechanism. Do you know what it is?
It's a trick-taking game.
It's Nokosu Dice by designer Yusuke Matsumoto. If you're unfamiliar with Nokosu Dice, it is an incredible little trick-taking game that uses not just cards, not just dice, but dice and cards together.
So cool. Give Jake dice drafting and he's going to love it.
The thing I love most about this game is the core mechanism is you'll draft dice. These act as cards in your hand. But whichever dice is the last one you played counts as your bid number. So that cuts through a lot of what has been difficult for me to get into about other trick-taking games that ask you to have a concrete bid at the start of your turn, which is just really difficult for new players. It makes some games where experienced players just have such a huge advantage. And that's, I'm sure, a more skilled Nokosu dice player is still going to have a big advantage over someone new to the game. But just having the ability to try and navigate yourself to a bid over the course of play gives it a really fun and dynamic feel to the game. On top of the fact that players have sort of both hidden and visible information, that also cuts through a lot of the kind of signaling and card counting type stuff that also is a big barrier of entry to trick-taking games. So this was really the first trick-taking game that I ever truly fell in love with and became a game that I wanted to revisit. And finding that enjoyment then I found playing trick-taking games subsequently to this, I've enjoyed them more. So for all those reasons, I think Nokosu Dice, while it's new to me this year, is really deserving of this place on my top 10 list. Number 8, Nokosu Dice.
That sort of remainder mechanism of the last dice left as your bid is pretty cool, because both you and your opponents can kind of see the bids, the options of what bids exist kind of waning down. as the round goes on. I think that's really cool, right? Sort of knowing. Otherwise, when I'm playing a game of, I don't know, spades, what someone's going to bid, they just bid, right? And then I have to be informed by that. But you kind of like slowly back into what people's bids are at the table. It sounds really interesting.
You would love it. It has
Would
a
I? Yeah.
very clear waning shape to the decision space, which I think all trick taking games do, but this one, it really shines through and in a kind of fun and exciting new feeling way.
Yeah. I got to try to get it. I know it's a little tough to find, but maybe I'll make it happen.
It was definitely got another printing, so it's perhaps easier now.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. So that's Jake's number 8 game of all time, Nokosu Dice. And now we're moving to my number 8 game of all time, which is Challengers.
Woo!
Challengers is a decision space. I would say this might be the game we like more than the average board game hobby community of all the games that we've covered ever. This is the like standout. We love this game. And this is a celebrated game, right? This Challengers won the Kennerspiel DRs, the sort of gamery game, winner of Germany's most popular board game. But Challengers is a drafting auto battler board game, card game, structured as a tournament. I think for me, Challengers is all about. It captures the feel of going to a tournament to play a card game, and also this sort of wild feel of. I don't know. It evokes something really nostalgic for me of playing something like Super Smash Bros. With my friends when I was 12, where it's zany and fun, and you never quite know what's going to happen, but it's energetic and interesting, and it's always a little bit different. That's Challengers for me. But undergirding all of this are really interesting decisions around what cards you should add to your deck and what cards you should take out. This is a game where you're drafting round after round cards from these 3 different decks, where the cards are getting better each time you move from deck A to deck B and then from deck B to deck C. And you're offered interesting decisions throughout the game. Say, okay, you can have 2 cards from deck A or 1 from deck B, but you don't know what cards will be in your pool before you make that decision. And you have to think about what cards are already in your deck and why you might want to move into these different decks. And you also have to make interesting decisions around when to remove cards. You've maybe built in a strategic direction where the random drafting packs, more or less, haven't given you what you were hoping you draw into. And you have to figure out how to salvage that play of Challengers. And I think those are some of the most rewarding plays for me, where I have this strategic direction in mind in the early game, and the game says, no, you shall not go that way. And finding your way out of a problem like that, and Challengers makes it possible. Its decision space gives you lots of interesting ways to strategically pivot, is really fun and rewarding. And I find it just gives the whole game this interesting sense of energy, like I was saying, which is cool because that mirrors the sense of energy that you have when you play Challengers in person with a table of 8 people with games sort of firing off all around you. Challengers is amazing. I haven't yet played Challengers 2, but I'm sure I'd love it. And I'm sure this is not the last you've heard of Challengers on this episode. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know for certain, but I'm guessing this game is on Jake's list as well. My number 8 game of all time, Challengers.
Well, in case it does show up on my list later, maybe I'll just save my thoughts for
Okay,
now.
just in
Just
case.
in case, yeah.
Okay. And then if not, well,
Yeah, I'll come back to it. We'll revisit it.
yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, moving on to my number 7 game of all time. Brendan, this is probably one that I had on my list last year, you'd think, right?
You would think so. I mean,
But it's not. You're wrong.
no!
Yeah, because this is also a brand new game to my list, and also a game that I played for the first time only 4 months or so ago.
What?
But I played it once on the table. Yeah, and I played it a bunch online now, and that is Age of Innovation by
Ooh,
designer
wow.
Helga Ostertag. So Age of Innovation, if you're not familiar with it, is the newest in the Terra Mystica line of games. I played Terra Mystica once, 10 years ago. It was too heavy for me at the time. Ended up selling it. Because of that kind of sour experience, I never played what's the space one?
Gaia Project.
Gaia Project. But, I was hearing about this game as sort of a really good kind of onboarding and like balanced version of original Terra Mystica. So I decided to give it a try. And I've absolutely just, fallen in love with this game. I think it's great. some of the things I like about it is it's a very heavy Euro style game, where it feels like you both get to do your own personal efficiency puzzle, and you can get in each other's way, but it feels like old school kind of indirect conflict, but
Mm,
then that indirect conflict is really turned up by blocking somebody where they're trying to expand, or even just getting next to them so that as they're trying to build up their region, whenever somebody builds a building next to you, that can give you a passive benefit of generating power, which you can use to do all kinds of cool things. So I find the actual gameplay fascinating. And another thing I absolutely love about it is the way the setup of the game enables you to pick and draft your own unique player factions. There's a bunch of different, classic fantasy factions. There's like navigators and goblins, and also psychics and all kinds of fun stuff. Then you also, along with that, you get to pick a special kind of starting ability. You get to pick some different resource loadout. What terrain is your home terrain on the board, which gives it kind of a sort of, in the smallest way, like a little bit of like a deck construction feel.
mm,
It's kind of getting me back into some aspect of that Magic the Gathering, like
mm.
metagaming. That is one of the things I first fell in love with this hobby for, but I don't often find in a lot of the games that I play today. So, for all those reasons, it's just been the game right now that I'm most excited to play a lot, continue to explore, figure out why I keep getting absolutely smacked against our friend Pete and other people in the Discord who are really familiar with this system of games. So I just know there's a lot to learn, figuring things out each game, really enjoying it. Maybe this is a little bit too much of a hot take since it's so new to me, but I think it's a game I'm going to keep playing for a long time, and that is Age of Innovation, my number 7 game.
This is one I've been playing as well with you, Jake, and it feels obtuse in an exciting way. In the way that I think board games are the one type of media where I'm pretty excited by something that feels obtuse, and I want to
Yeah,
keep digging into it and trying to understand how it works. Um,
it's refined, but it has like the older style of game design
yeah,
where it has rough edges that aren't
yeah.
sanded down completely and lead to really interesting and sometimes punishing gameplay experiences. And that's something I'm finding, that really calls to me these days.
Nice. So my number 7, and that was Age of Innovation from Jake. My number 7 game of all time is a Renner Knizia game, Rhino Kniz, and it's Modern Art. Modern Art is a classic auction game in which players take on the role of art dealers, sort of, and speculators. Your avatar is a museum, which kind of works, kind of doesn't. It doesn't really matter. Get in this sort of thematic environment of buying and selling art, and you have 5 different artists that you have a hand of cards that represent works from these artists potentially, and also different types of auctions that you can put on for these paintings. And you're speculating over the value of these artists over the course of 5 rounds of the game. An artist will come into vogue and be popular, and their paintings will be worth a lot. And you'd really like to have a lot of those paintings to sell in a given round, as that will give you lots of cold hard cash, and you want to chase trends and also set trends. So it's a hand management auction game that I think one of the things that I love about this game is the simplicity of the design makes it pretty approachable. This is a game I can put in front of more casual game players, and they just sort of get it. Oh yeah, I'm buying paintings. It's an auction game. But it also has interesting decisions, and I find hilarious moments. It's one of the most abstract games I've played that really sets a thematic environment and a thematic feel that just really nails what it's going for. And I think Knizia for me is sort of the master of capturing a thematic feel to his games. And Modern Art is a great example of that. This is a game that I don't need to play all the time, but it's a game that I love to play at least a few times a year. And it's my number 7 favorite game of all time and my favorite auction game of all time, Modern Art.
I played Modern Art for the 3rd time this year, and it's definitely the best play I've had with
Nice.
it. I think while it can be accessible, the more experienced people are with the game, the better the game plays overall, because
Mm,
it can lead to weird moments. I don't want to like yuck your yum where somebody just makes bad bets that kind of throws the whole game off. Like there's no
sure.
real guardrails here. So I think that can be a challenge for new players. It can be difficult. There's no real signposting for what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, especially with the added wrinkle of when you're the auctioneer and you're like paying money to
Don't
the
buy your own
bank.
paintings.
Don't buy your own paintings, folks.
Really don't. Really try not to do that.
Great pick, Brendan. So let's move on to my number 6 game of all time. This is probably on my previous top 10 list, you would think, but I don't think it is. I'm starting to think that I put any from my last year's top 10 list.
I love it.
And I really may not have. But my number 6 game is the second by one of my all-time favorite designers, Stefan Feld. And this is actually the number one highest Stefan Feld game that I have on my list this year. And it's Bonfire. Has really climbed the list for me on the back of just some really fun in-person plays. Also playing it a bit on Yucata as well. The thing I love about Bonfire is you have another classic Stefan Feld point salad game where you can go in any kind of different direction. But here, as opposed to Trajan, right? These games are very similar in a lot of ways. They both have really fun core action selection mechanisms that you can kind of min-max on your own player board. The biggest, most salient difference between the two is in Bonfire, you are really empowered to pick your own path through the game. You're going out, you're choosing the goals that you're trying to complete. You're choosing which of the overall shared objectives are the ones you're going to be focusing on. And I think the ability to play a different game, both by the way the board sets up at the beginning and by what you choose to focus on, especially with some of the bigger, more valuable yellow tasks that you'll be seeking out to achieve, create just a really wonderful, different texture. I've had a ton of fun doing set collection in this game, but I've also had a ton of fun playing the spatial reasoning puzzle with the tiles in my internal action selection board.
Yeah.
So I think it's a game that I'm really just playing a lot, enjoying every time, still kind of stink at, but not getting bored of. And if ever you were, there's an expansion out there that adds even more cool stuff. So that's Bonfire. I think it's the best Stefan Feld game to play in 2024.
I think that Stefan Feld at his best designs games that offer really interesting tactical decisions and really interesting strategic decisions in a way that few other designers do. And Bonfire has that to me in spades. A huge part of that is that you get to see all of your sort of action selection tiles are set, right? And you pick from the top or the bottom. So it gives you a huge amount of agency to navigate this wide open decision space. And there's just enough room to get in each other's ways, pursuing these sort of common goals that work in an interesting way where you sort of want to, whenever you take a goal, you get paid off on it immediately. So you kind of want to wait because you want to get more of that thing that's going to make the goal worth a lot to you. But if you wait too long, someone else is going to snatch that gnome up for themselves. The theme in this game is pretty zany in a neat way. There's nothing like it. And I don't know. Bonfire is neat. It's a game that I think the more I played it, the more I enjoyed it. And I could see Bonfire, had it been a game that came out in 2010, rather than something like, I don't know, The Castles of Burgundy, maybe it would be remembered even more and made a little bit bigger splash as people had more of an attention span to sink their teeth into it. Bonfire is cool. I absolutely see why it's on your list, Jake. Did you play it with the expansion this year?
Yeah, I have played it with the expansion. I think the expansion offers some different modules, and we played with all but the event deck module,
Okay.
if I remember correctly. I came away from that play feeling like you don't need it.
Yeah.
I think it's just there if you want more Bonfire. But honestly, one of the strongest things about Bonfire is how much game comes in that box, how much variability.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine it feeling played out for someone unless they've really sunk a ton of place into this.
Yeah. No two games have felt alike, and I've played it more than 10 times for sure. Okay, great. That's Jake's number 6 game of all time, Stefan Feld's Bonfire. And my number 6 game of all time is a classic area control game, maybe the area control game, or at least the classic area control game. And this is, I have a Kiesling game, so I feel like I need a Kramer game. And this is El Grande. El Grande is this newly re-released game in which you are trying to manage a hand of cards that control both two things at the same time. Your access to these little knights, your caballeros that you're going to put out onto the board to try to get majority in different regions, and also the turn order in which you're going to pick special actions that will meaningfully shape the board. And that makes for a robust, interesting foundation for the game to be built on. But for me, what takes El Grande from being a good, solid, obviously very imitated area control game is that it also at its heart has simultaneous decisions at the end of its scoring rounds. There's a special province called the Castillo where you can choose to play each round, and the Castillo is neat because you get to score those caballeros twice potentially. You score the Castillo at the end of each round, just like you score the other provinces, but then you also, every player who has any caballeros, meeples in the new version, which I think is a smart change, cubes in the old version, simultaneously picks a province that they want to move their pieces to, vying for control of a new province. And for me, that simultaneous decision is really what makes it pop. It says, get in the mind, get in the head of your opponents at the table. And it makes for these really bombastic, exciting reveals, and has a cool little piece that uses, well, this little disc to choose which province you want to go to. So for a lot of reasons, for all of those reasons, and I think also just how playable it is, it's a lot of game with not a ton of complexity, with exciting moments, dramatic reveals, and interesting decisions, make it my number 6 game of all time, El Grande.
I have no comment.
Is it on your list? I wonder.
No comment.
Was it last year?
I already said no comment. Okay.
Was it last year?
You try and get me to comment.
Year.
I won't comment.
You like
okay.
It. Okay.
Going to number 5, and for the first time, it is a game on my list by designer Wolfgang Kramer. It is Tikal, Brendan. A new game to my top 10 list this year, if you'll believe that.
Let's go.
So Tikal is an awesome board game. We played it for the first time at Geekway to the West together. And our play was kind of cool. Like, we enjoyed it, but we weren't 100% sold. I think being a learning game to everybody, we felt like the pace of play was a bit of a problem. You've got 10 action points. That's going to cause almost anybody who's even the slightest bit prone to playing AP, which I certainly can be the slightest bit prone to that as well, is going to have a hard time picking how to spend 10 action points on your turn. That is just a thing that, as a modern board game player, somebody who came into this hobby as in 2015, read the rules and just like looked over to you like 10 action points, that can't be right. That just seems so insane to me. But the more I play it, and maybe it is because I'm playing this in a climate of super quick, micro turn style games, that having the opportunity to sink 10 action points into a single move fundamentally, change my whole board position in a really interesting and unique way. Maybe I'm flying with my large worker guy that's worth 3 archaeologists all by himself to take over somebody's whole temple that they've been building in one foul swoop. It feels like a delicacy, right? It feels exciting in a way that few modern games have felt to me. So in Tikal, you are playing as archaeologists exploring the site of Tikal, trying to claim temples, trying to dig up artifacts, all for a really interesting and dynamic, constantly changing area majority board. Very similar to the style of other games in the Mask trilogy, but I found that this one is my favorite, both because of the 10 action points being something increasingly I really enjoy. How simple to understand the tiles are that come out. Like, they are almost all the same.
Yeah.
But how flexible and how creative you can be in the placement of them. How many truly different ways there are to win this game, whether you're trying to explore out quickly, or you can just stick around the home base and you can win that way too. And then on top of all that, as soon as the game starts feeling maybe like you're getting your head around it, the puzzle's starting to feel a little bit stagnant, you can, if you are so crazy as to want to do this, which I've now done one time, play with an auction variant that allows you to auction points for the different tiles on offer each round, including the tile that triggers scoring, just completely renews and pumps new life into the play. I think it is an absolute brilliant design, well worth exploring today, and well deserving as the number 5 best game of all time, according to me.
Tikal is pretty awesome. It's one of those games like El Grande that's just complex enough, I think. It's sort of shocking how much it pulls out of the design punches that it throws, and it gets a lot out of every single mechanic that it throws in a way that I think it's yeah, just like you said, Jake, it's well worth your time. And so is Cusco, the slightly better game in the vast trilogy. But I love Tikal, and I'm excited we had talked about potentially covering Tikal again on the show. We sort of did a pseudo deep dive of it last year when we first played it. And I've picked it up and played it a bunch more. I really enjoyed Tikal, and now that it's on Board Game Arena, I think the perfect excuse for us to maybe really sink our teeth in and give it a full hour. So I'm sure we will at some point. So the next game on my list is one that was previously my number 1 game of all time. Then last year was my number 3 game of all time, and is now my number 5 game of all time. And it's Cosmic Encounter. Cosmic Encounter is a negotiation sort of space conflict game in which you have a unique alien power that you're using to vie for victory over. And to do that, you have to get control of 5 foreign planets. To do this, you have to use not just the cards that you have in your hand to play this sort of novel hand management game, but also you're really using your negotiation skills and your wit to manage people's perception at the table of the position you might be in. And I think for me, I have 2 favorite things about Cosmic Encounter. One, every time I play, I feel like interesting things happen with the hundreds of alien powers that are in the box. And I have a couple of expansions, and that's really sort of enlivened the game. And 2, I always walk away with a story. And I love playing games where when I do sit down and play it, I feel like there's something interesting that I'm going to have to think about or talk about or remember after the fact. It creates awesome social situations. And I find it is a vehicle for really interesting gameplay among people who want a little bit more of a boisterous game. So Cosmic Encounter, less strategic than all of the previous games on my list, but I've maybe had higher peaks in terms of sheer fun playing Cosmic than any of the games that have come before it as well. So Cosmic, though I haven't played it a lot at all this year, remains my number 5 game of all time.
So it was 1, now it's 3, now it's 5. So that's good. That's all good.
And it is still top 10.
Nothing is sacred, Brendan. You know, I think you're holding things sacred that you don't need to be. But
if I was coming to Geekway,
on.
I'd say let's play Cosmic.
Somebody in our Geekway planning chat said, like, should we do an 8-player game of Cosmic?
No,
like,
not
guys,
8.
I was like, you guys have your fun, but no,
5,
I will not be
though.
participating in that. Oh, okay. I will also not be participating in that. It's my turn. And look, so far, everybody will agree Trajan, Scout, Nokosu Dice, Age of Innovation, Bonfire, and Tikal are the 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th, 6th, and 5th best game of all time. I think everyone listening would agree with that. However, this next pick, new to the list this year,
Oh my gosh,
may be a bit controversial, but nevertheless, I had to share the truth. I'm here to bring you the truth, and I have to once again lift up and tell people to play Findorff by Freedom and Frieza.
The 4th greatest game of all
time.
time?
The 4th best game of all
Findorff?
time is Findorff, about the Findorff region of Germany, birthplace of game designer Freedom and Frieze.
Who doesn't know it?
Right. So Findorff, a game and place that has 3 F's in its name. I'm making jokes here, but it's genuinely a game that I have really grown to love as I've played it more and more over the course of the year. I think I've now played this game 6 times on the table, and it's just been a complete treat every time. I've been impressed by how dynamic the game feels. If you're unfamiliar with Findorff, which you very well might be, this is not a wildly popular game.
Yeah.
It is a economic style game where you're working to build out the city of Findorff. And you do that by building these structure cards. So you'll start with a hand of cards that cost a variety of resources, which you'll produce using manufacturing tiles over the course of the game. So it'll cost money, but it might cost bricks or iron as well. And then there's also a common supply of 5 to 7 structures as well, depending on your player count. But each of these structures give you some kind of crazy, wildly overpowered benefit that then has a big impact on the engine that you're trying to build. And it's really fun playing this game each time to see the way the different order of the structures you're building change the way that you want to play the game. Do you want to kind of race to the end? Are you trying to stop? Your action selection in this game is based on a rondel. So are you playing in a way that you've created a lot of efficiency by getting a lot of bonus actions on that rondel? So you're kind of going slowly down the rondel, or stopping on every space, or are you trying to hit the same action over and over again and race through to the end so you can trigger your bureaucracy phase and run your engine? And I've seen both things be really successful. And all of that is true. And I haven't even yet done the drafting variant, which I think is going to be the best way to play this game. If you can ever find an experienced group who's willing to give this draft a try, where to start out the game, instead of getting dealt a set selection of structures, you get to draft the ones that you'll start with. So you could even create that strategy before the game begins. I'm hoping to play the game this way at Geekway. It's just a blast. It's a bigger game than the rule set and time to play implies. You can't find a more fun, energetic 5-player economic Euro game that plays in 90 minutes flat than Findorff. And I think it's really deserving of this spot on the list. If I didn't truly believe that, you could trust me, I wouldn't put it up there.
Findorff is really cool because it plays in 90 minutes, but it gives players an immense amount of agency over the strategic path that they want to approach. There's also this interesting economic system going on with the value of peat in the game, which really matters. It also is thematically pretty nuanced and interesting and funky in a way that sort of Jake has bad opinions on cheese, good opinions on games. It's like a funky brie, like a washed rind cheese that you just like, oh, this is strange and delicious. But I think for me, Jake, the thing about Findorff that I love is how quick it is around the table. Some games engage you because you care about what other people are doing on their turn when other people are playing, and some games just engage you because your turn is just back before you know it. And Findorff is definitely that way. Sometimes you can't think fast enough to decide what you're going to do on your next turn before it's already your turn again, even in a high player count game of Findorff. And yeah, this game's great. Totally see why it's your number 4 game of all time. But the true and number 4 game of all time, it's a shame that it only made your honorable mentions, is The Resistance, Dan Eskridge's classic social deduction game. For me, The Resistance is in a tier of its own because it's one of those rare games that so perfectly captures a genre that every other game that I've ever played since, I mentally measure against the yardstick of The Resistance and say, this is different, but it's just not quite as good. The Resistance is a game that pits 2 groups, a group of hiddenly selected spies and also members of the Resistance trying to overthrow an evil empire of some sort. It doesn't matter. Just going against each other, trying to win some rounds. But The Resistance is awesome. It's a game that creates heart palpitating moments, encourages organically an emergency, these tense moments of encouraged betrayal. And it's a game that plays out a bit like theater. And it's also not a game that I know is right for everyone or every situation, but it is a game that I think when it hits, it just is among the most exciting games I've ever played. In our episode on The Resistance earlier this year, our deep dive, Jake said it's a game that everyone should play just so you can experience empathically the feeling of being accused of a crime you haven't committed. And I think Jake's onto something with a sense that Resistance makes you feel things playing the game when you get in its magic circle in a way that few games do. Certainly few other games in my top 10. I think it's one of the best games of all time. And while I won't play it all the time, it's a game I absolutely cannot wait to return to. And you don't need Merlin. Don't
Yeah.
worry about Avalon. Just play
I
the
love that you
Resistance.
said that, because part of the reason for doing this episode now is to tell people who we are as gamers. And I think one of the big signposts we already hit, which is that we like challengers more than
Sure.
reasonable people. But I think the second biggest decision space idiosyncrasy is we're the only people telling you to play the Resistance without Avalon expansion. And I genuinely still believe that to this day, that that's the
Yeah.
best way to play the game. And I think part of it is because it just makes it more raw, right?
Yep.
Like in real life, there's not Merlin sitting there when you're accused of a crime or whatever. It's, it allows people to be people and try and solve this in the way people do in real life all the
Yeah.
time. Figure out.
Sometimes it's more fun when there's more footing to stand on. And Merlin gives you a little bit of that in the decision space. But sometimes it's also fun to just flail around and just make the most of what's there. And I think the Resistance does that perfectly. It's my number 4 game of all time.
Great pick. And my number 11. So, the one that was just off the list for me.
Nice.
I think the last of mine will be going a bit quicker. Oh shoot, I was looking at your list. Whoops, sorry. Spoiler.
Jackson shocked to learn what his number 3
Oh
game
my
of all
god.
time is.
That is not what I do not remember putting that here. It's like, excuse me. Get out of here. Okay. My number 3 best game of all time is, and I'm not making this up, returning to the list this year.
Yeah.
And that is Broom Service by
You came to your
Alexander
senses.
Pfister. Well, it was on the list last year. It's on it again. My senses are sound.
Good.
I remain sound of mind
But our
despite
first return.
Yeah, despite what people might be thinking after I told them that Findorff was the 4th best game of all time. Now they're back with me because Broom Service is just one of the best Euro games ever made. And I think it is so because it has both, it gives you a ton of different decision space to explore in the box by all kinds of different modules you can play with. But the core game mechanisms themselves are so simple and familiar, right? It gives you kind of a poker element of bluffing every time you choose an action. It forces you to enter donkey space, look at other people's position on the board and consider, is this an action that they might have taken? If so, what is the risk to me worth it to still nevertheless be a brave prairie witch, or shall I be a cowardly one? The theming makes it all the more amusing, funny, and fun to play. And it's one of the oldest games in my collection, and it's still one of the ones I'm getting to the table most often after all of these years. I've never had a bad time playing this game. It's always a good decision to get it out. I almost need to get a new copy of it because my cards are getting like truly worn out at this
Heck
point,
yeah.
which is honestly the best compliment that I think you could give any board game. Yeah, I think this one will remain in my top 10 forever, just because I love it that much. And everyone should definitely check out and play Broom Service. I would recommend it almost universally. I think there are a select group of people that maybe won't get so much out of this game if you really lean into wanting a more solitaire style Euro puzzle. But outside of those folks, I think Broom Service is a crowd pleaser and well deserving as the 3rd best game of all time.
Nice. My number 3 favorite game, best game of all time, is a divisive game. It is not Jake's number 3 favorite game or best game of all time. It is Keyflower. Keyflower is a strategy Euro game that plays out a little bit differently every time. It's one part action game, one part logistics puzzle, in which over 4 rounds representing the 4 seasons of the year, you're going to build a little village, and you're going to pull together unique pieces in your village of things that you can do, things that you can make, and also goals that you're sort of aiming for. You're putting together a little engine that you're trying to run so your little village can succeed and you can come out victorious at the end. And you're doing this while also each round utilizing the pieces you've already grabbed, trying to spend the workers in this worker placement game also. Oh, did I mention it's also a worker placement game? To utilize those pieces you've already added to your little village, but also utilize them to get new pieces. Oh, and also you can use them to utilize other players' tiles in their villages. But if you do, you lose those pieces. But you also maybe block them because there's also 4 different colors of workers in the game. Oh, and also you start the game with these endgame goals, these tiles, these winter tiles, where you have privileged information about the type of final scoring conditions that will be in the game, and you have control of how many you might want to add. Keyflower plays out differently every time. And it's also, for me, the perfect level of familiar and challenge every time I play. And it's also sort of one of those rare games that I think tries to throw the kitchen sink into the game. It's a worker placement auction game logistic puzzle with variable end goals that doesn't feel bloated. It just feels somehow streamlined to me. And I think that for all of those reasons, and also the fact that each time I play, it's just not a puzzle that I've gotten tired of yet. There's unique strategic paths. You can play it a little bit differently. And because of the way in which the tiles come out, it really does force you to think critically about the strategic path that you take based on the context of that play. If certain tiles come out, other tiles get way better. And if certain tiles don't come out, tiles that were good last game might not be very good this game. So it forces you to think about the environment of this particular game overall and make nuanced decisions about the environment that emergently came out based on the variability of the tiles. And I think that's why all these years later, Keyflower is a 2012 game. I still am aching to play Keyflower on the table. I love playing it on Board Game Arena. It's a game that will never leave my physical collection, and it's what I'm always excited to play. And it's my number 3 game of all time, Richard Breeze's Keyflower.
And we'll move right along to my number 2 game of all time. And it's one that is new to my list this year, but not new to this episode because Brendan has already talked about the greatness that is El Grande.
Nice.
The classic, definitive area majority game. It's a game that I've played on the table at Gamers Ranch this year, had an excellent play, got last place. But it's just so fun every time I play it. I think the thing that amazes me most about this game is that even though people say it can drag a little bit, you only get 9 actions over the course of the game. I find that there's never a dull moment.
Yeah.
I'm always sitting there really engaged with what my opponents are doing. It's a game where, because you are quite constrained by the action cards available to you on your turn, that it's a game where table talk, like telling people to go after someone else, whatever, it doesn't feel so annoying to me because at the end of the day you're still limited to what the regions you can access because of the king and the cards presented in front of you. I think the auction cards, the way that works is just a stroke of pure genius, where the higher the number you bid, the fewer troops you're able to move into your active supply. I mean, it just works like a dream. So simple, but yet gives you so much space to play. I don't think I could say enough good things about El Grande. I have yet to play the newest, colorful edition of this game, though I am hoping that means that the fact that this exists means I'll have the chance to play it on the table with much more frequency without having to kind of track down one of the harder to get older versions of this game. I think El Grande is without a doubt one of the best games ever designed and well deserving at the number 2 spot on my list, second best game of all time, El Grande.
Or as Mai likes to call it, Sad Boy and the King. Because the classic cover.
Oh, Sad Boy and the King.
Okay, great. So my number 2 game of all time is, Jake, we're coming together. The Interdecisional Spaceship is steering in the same direction because it is Broom Service.
Yeah.
Broom Service. It was hard to bite my tongue earlier when Jake was talking about Broom Service. Jake mentioned Donkey Space. This is a space where I love that games can live, where I know that you know this, so I'm going to do that, but you know that I know that you know this, and that I think you're going to do that, so you're actually going to do this other thing. That's the space that Broom Service lives in, while also being this on-the-board logistics puzzle, this sort of pick up or brew and deliver game where you're making potions and trying to get them to towers, while also doing things with things like this cool set collection puzzle of storm clouds and wands with a weather fairy. And it also, Jake, has gorgeous Vincent Dutrait art that you sort of mentioned that I think makes the game feel approachable and whimsical and sort of puts you in the exact right headspace. Sort of pairing of art and feeling on the table is really excellent in Broom Service. It also is a game that scales nicely between player counts. I love Broom Service at 2-player. It really emphasizes that donkey space puzzle, and it creates these sort of cursed actions that add a little wrinkle to the lead and follow mechanism of Broom Service's cards. And I also really enjoy it at higher player counts where you're all stepping on each other's toes, and it feels really scary to take the more powerful version of an action if you're early in the turn order, knowing that someone else is definitely going to eat your Hill Witch lunch. Broom Service is one of the games that I can think of that also lives the most in 3 distinct places. It's a game that lives completely on the board. Where your pieces are at a given time and where your opponent's pieces are matters so much. So you really have to think about that. The cards that you have in your hand are the key to everything. So you're really studying those and you're looking at what other people have played. And then it also lives above the table. It lives in sort of staring into your opponent's eyes, trying to figure out what they're up to, what they're going to do. And for all of those reasons, I think Broom Service is one of the most clean card-driven board games ever made. And I say this as someone with El Grande in their top 10, and also my number 2 favorite game of all time. And then Jake, let's add this to the list, right? Challengers is one of our favorite games. The Resistance should be played without Merlin, and Broom Service is one of the best games ever designed. Great Western Trail step aside, Alexander Pfister's best game is Broom Service.
100% agree. Not even close, folks. And that leaves us to just sharing with you the best game ever designed. And I don't know, maybe Brendan had trouble thinking about what this was, but it was pretty cut and dry for me. New to this list this year, Challengers, my favorite game. You know, we've talked about Challengers ad nauseum at this point. It's the game that excites me the most right now. It's the game that I most want to play. I think fair criticism has been leveraged at Challengers by some folks in our Discord that Challengers is actually better played online than it is in person, and then that somehow like diminishes its rating or value as like a board game proper. That's just not an argument. I think that makes sense logically. Like I can understand where somebody would be coming from with that, and I actually agree. I think Challengers is best played online. I love that I can play it on Board Game Arena and get in a whole game in 20 minutes and feel like I've had this whole entire epic experience with the arc. That to me is not a downside. That's an upside, and the fact that I can have that there, and I also have it in a box at my house where I can have an epic experience with 8 friends is just all upside. It's a game that I love to play. I'm always excited to take my turn when it pops up on Board Game Arena. I'm excited to play the game live there. I'm excited to play the game live in person and even make it like it feels like an event game, even though you play it in an hour. And I've loved just exploring this game with people on our Discord and talking about it. And very few games have ever kind of made me so invested in it. So for 2024, I have absolutely no problem putting Challengers at number 1 on my list of best games of all time, at least for me.
Nice. Well said, Jake. We'll keep Challengers off the bench for years to come. I think Challengers is awesome in person, though. It's so fun, the energy at the table. Though, granted, I've only played it with the 8 in person, and that's the way to play it, I think, if you're going to.
100%, yeah.
The energy
I would probably pass at not. Maybe I'd play it at 6, too.
Sure.
I played at 4, we were kind of like, eh.
Yeah, you want to be playing new people, and you want to have the excitement of everything going on around you. I could see that. Challengers is awesome. My number 1 game of all time is a game by my favorite designer of all time, and it is a game by Reiner Knizia. It is Babylonia. Babylonia is a tile-laying game by the Great Doctor that is sort of structured around these 3 different paths to points: ziggurats, cities, and farms. On your given turn, you're playing tiles to the board, utilizing this interesting system where you're building up these large hands or trays of farmers that you gush out onto the table all at once. It's a timing puzzle in which you're in conversation with other players at the table about when it's time to do what and why it's time to do this now. It feels like a dance in a lot of ways with 4 players, and it's also another game on my list that I think scales beautifully from 2 to 4 players. It's the best Reiner Knizia tile laying game, and when I say that, this is in the genre of games like Tigris and Euphrates and Blue Lagoon and Samurai and Yellow and Yangtze and Through the Desert and the new Cascadia. It lives there. And in my opinion, Babylonia is the best. It's quick, it's snappy, it's energetic, and it has a really exciting game arc where there's punchy, exciting moments and decisions early on as you snap up easy points in easy locations. Maybe you're going for a ziggurat and getting a special power that's going to catapult you a little bit ahead, but it culminates because of the city scoring at the heart of each of these games into these climactic moments where 2 players are on a collision course for one another, and then just points gush out of the cities like pinatas that you've hit, making decisions to add to and add to over and over. It's a game where you really it rewards repeat plays, so you can see the shape the game might take, and no 2 games are played exactly alike because the board itself is seeded differently each time, not just the hand of tiles you draw. I love Babylonia. This is maybe the heaviest game I think I could put in front of anyone who is excited to sink their teeth into board games for the first time. And I've done that a few times, and it's gone really well. And it's had tense, interesting decisions where people can sort of say, oh yeah, I get it. This was really fun. Let's play again. Babylonia is a masterpiece, and I think it's one of Reiner Knizia's greatest games of all time. And that's why it's my number 1 game of all time, Babylonia.
Awesome. Well done, Brendan. I salute you. Great list. Do you have any final thoughts about your list as a whole?
Ooh, my list as a whole. I hope that my list as a whole for listeners sort of exhibits the ranging and I think maybe somewhat interactive nature of games that I tend to enjoy, but also the puzzly side of things. I tend to like slightly lighter games than Jake overall. And I think when I am playing a more mid-weight strategy game, I want it to be something where I'm getting in the way of other players and they're getting in the way of me. Games like Babylonia and Broom Service and Keyflower really exhibit that. I also have a penchant for social games. It's why I like The Resistance and Cosmic Encounter and Modern Art, a game made better by the social play and the social dynamics it creates. And then I think my list maybe does a not the best job, Jake, at highlighting my love of card games. Challenger certainly bumps that up there. But I was thinking this year, why don't I have more card games on my list? And the real answer is I'm not sure. I love card games. I think card games are amazing. But a lot of them just fell right outside my top 10 this year and I think card games for me really ebb and flow. They come into moments and seasons where I'm playing them over and over and over again, and then they fall off. And maybe just because I recently had a baby, I'm not playing a lot of card games right now. I'm playing things like My City, Eternal Game instead, or Azul on Board Game Arena instead. But yeah, that's sort of my high level thoughts. How about you, Jake? What do you think your list over espouses for you?
I don't know what it says about me as a gamer. I guess comes to mind is kind of midweight games. I think games that have ability to feel different at kind of big bands of possible outcomes.
Yep.
Clever action selection mechanisms comes through as well. And then also just the fact that I have so many new games to my list this year. I was thinking about that. I mean, that wasn't on purpose. I use the same process as I've used in years past. And I think my relationship with games, and especially the games in my collection, is just changing a lot this year, more so than years in the past. I think the biggest factor with that is that I've had really for the first time in my life a very consistent Monday night board game group with people that are just as enthusiastic about games as me, if not more so, versus being the person that's always like the most enthusiastic person trying to get games in front of people. And that's just changed the way I look
Yeah.
at a lot of the games on myself. It's no longer like, oh, I hope I could get people, start here and then play a gateway game. And then like, it'd be so exciting to play the Castles of Burgundy with them. It's like I can just pick out any game and actually just play it with enthusiasts, right? And for whatever reason, that's kind of impacted the way I look at games. And I think that came through a lot as I was filling out my Pub Meeple ranking this year. I hope it does help people perhaps get more out of the show to know kind of who we are and what we're coming from. But this is just one moment in time. These are what the top 10 games I think are right now. And it will probably change a lot again next time I do this list, depending on what I've got going on in my life.
And I think both these lists together do sort of show, if you've never listened to Decision Space before, one thing you can expect is Jake and I don't necessarily have a deep love for sort of classic gems or new games. We just we want to dig in and explore games and see what's speaking to us right now. And I think that these lists do a great job of showing that too.
Yeah, awesome. Well,
Cool.
thank you all so much for listening to this special episode. Thanks again for nominating us for the Golden Geek. I'll make one more plug. If you've made it all the way to the end of this conversation and enjoyed it, please consider voting for us over on BoardGameGeek.com. If you need Geek Gold in order to do that, shoot us a message on Discord, and we'd be happy to provide it to you.
And thank you to Hembry for their intro and outro song that we use, Reach Out. And if you want to find more things Decision Space, you can find all of them, including a link to our Discord in the show notes or on decisionspacepodcast.com. Until next time, bye y'all.
Bye y'all.